This is the story of Gideon, a man whose life was fully transformed through faith in God's plan. At a time when Israel was oppressed by the Midianites, the people cried out to God for deliverance. The Midianites were ruthless, like locusts, devouring everything in their path, leaving the Israelites in despair. Fields were destroyed, livestock stolen, and hearts crushed. This was the devastation Gideon grew up witnessing. He saw his people living in fear, sheltering in caves, and hiding from their oppressors. One day, while threshing wheat in a wine press to keep it hidden from the Midianites, Gideon had an encounter that would change his life forever. An angel of the Lord appeared to him and said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." Now, let that sink in for a moment. Gideon, an ordinary man who saw himself as the least of his family and whose family was the weakest in their tribe, was called a mighty warrior. Gideon was quick to express his doubt, questioning God's presence in the alarming reality around him. "If the Lord is with us," Gideon asked, "why has all this happened?" But God's calling is unshaken by human doubts. The Lord turned to him and said, "Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you?" Still unconvinced, Gideon asked for a sign. The angel instructed him to prepare an offering. When Gideon placed the offering on a rock, fire sprang up and consumed it. This miraculous sign ignited a flicker of faith in Gideon, though he remained cautious. Before Gideon could take on the Midianite army, the first test of his faith would come much closer to home. God instructed him to tear down his father's altar to Baal and cut down the Asherah pole beside it. Gideon obeyed, but did so at night, fearing his family and the townspeople. The next morning, chaos erupted when the men of the town discovered what had happened. Gideon's father, standing firm, defended his son and said, "If Baal really is a god, let him defend himself." The idol was powerless, just as Gideon's actions had proven. With this victory behind him, Gideon moved forward in obedience to God's plan. He was now ready to face the Midianites. Gathering an army of 32,000 men, Gideon finally felt somewhat ready for the monumental task ahead. But God had a different plan. "You have too many men," God explained. "If Israel wins, they might boast that their own strength saved them." So Gideon sent home all who were afraid. Then God reduced the army even further by testing how the men drank water at a stream. Left with only 300 men, Gideon undoubtedly felt fear creeping in. But God reminded him that victory was not about numbers. It was about his power. Under the cover of darkness, armed with trumpets and torches concealed in clay jars, Gideon and his small army carried out God's unconventional plan. They approached the Midianite camp, and at Gideon's signal, they blew their trumpets, smashed the jars, and shouted, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon!" Startled, the Midianites turned on each other in confusion and fled. Without a sword being raised, God handed victory to Israel. This story teaches us something profound. God doesn't call the qualified. He qualifies the called. Gideon thought he was insignificant, yet God saw a mighty warrior within him. Gideon's faith, though hesitant at first, grew through obedience and trust in God's plans. His story reminds us that God works through our weaknesses to show his strength. What challenges do you face today that seem insurmountable? Gideon's story is a reminder that you are never alone in the fight. God sees you not for who you are now, but for who you can become through him. Just as the Lord was with Gideon, he is with us in our struggles, calling us to step out in faith. So the next time you feel overwhelmed or doubtful, remember Gideon's journey. From threshing wheat in concealment to leading a nation to victory, it all started with saying yes to God's call. Let his victory be your inspiration today.